Prince of Ivory City, the object of Widow's former affection and the catalyst for her villainy. The prince's rejection and mistreatment of Widow led to her heartbreak and subsequent vendetta against all men. She sought revenge primarily against him, going so far as to orchestrate plots to assassinate or overthrow the prince via proxies. Ironically, in the Old Wounds storyline, the prince ends up using Widow's own sphere to empower himself, becoming a threat to both Widow and the realm. Widow's feelings for the prince curdled into hatred, but it was born from genuine love scorned, making their relationship a tragic underpinning of her character. Shogun, once the loyal warlord to the prince, Shogun became Widow's pawn. Exploiting his ambition, Widow enticed Shogun with promises of power, the magic sphere, and manipulated him into betraying his master. She intended to make Shogun a puppet ruler under her control. This alliance was entirely one-sided. Shogun was enthralled by either Widow's allure or the lust for power she dangled before him. Ultimately, Shogun's coup failed and he was imprisoned by the prince, a fate indirectly caused by Widow's schemes. In SF2's main storyline, Shogun later appears as another demon boss in Act 6, suggesting Titan's influence on him as well. However, Widow and Shogun's fates are entwined by that failed rebellion. Widow likely holds no genuine loyalty to Shogun, he was a means to her revenge. Sensei, the wise mentor figure in SF2, Sensei confronted Widow during the Old Wounds events. At first, Widow regarded Sensei as just another man to despise and possibly kill, especially since he was allied with the prince. She fought him savagely. But Sensei's victory and, more importantly, his willingness to empathize with her pain, earned Widow's cautious respect. Sensei told her he understood her suffering and truly intended to stop the prince's tyranny, not to harm her needlessly. This moment of understanding led Widow to cooperate, giving Sensei valuable information and warnings. Thus, Sensei is one of the few males Widow did not completely scorn. He managed to break through her bitterness, if only slightly. Their relationship is adversarial yet marked by a brief truce born of mutual interest in stopping the prince. Shadow, a very complex dynamic exists between Widow and Shadow. In SF2, Shadow is the first man to outright resist Widow's charms, which immediately fascinates her. She addresses him with unusual intrigue, calling him an interesting specimen and indicating she'll be watching him closely. Over multiple encounters, Shadow proves his strength to her. By defeating her in combat, twice in the main story, and again in the interlude, Shadow earns a mix of ire and admiration from Widow. She never successfully bends him to her will, which perhaps makes him one of the few people she might respect in her own twisted way. In the interlude, Widow even acts almost like an unwilling advisor, warning Shadow about Titan's manipulations. This suggests that, given their common interest in stopping Titan, Widow can set aside her hostility, albeit temporarily. In Arena's voice lines, Widow occasionally speaks dismissively of heroes and righteousness, possibly alluding to people like Shadow. Ultimately, Shadow is perhaps the closest thing Widow has to an equal, an opponent she cannot dominate through lust or lies, only through skill, and even then she faltered. Their relationship is adversarial but strangely symbiotic in the fight against Titan. Widow remains alive due to Shadow's actions, closing the gates. May is Shadow's close friend, and implied love interest, in SF2. Widow's powers curiously had no effect on May as well, possibly because Widow's charm specifically targets the desires of men. Widow doesn't directly interact much with May in the story, but it's worth noting that May was present during the demon's journey and was likewise immune. This might have helped Shadow stay focused, knowing his companion wasn't swayed either. From Widow's perspective, May would just be another obstacle or a bystander of no interest, since Widow enjoys preying on those susceptible to desire, and May would not fall for her. So while not much is said between them, May's significance is being one of the few people completely untouched by Widow's influence, further highlighting how unique Shadow's circle is. Other demons, Widow is one among the 6 shadow demons unleashed in SF2, and she appears alongside Lynx and Butcher again in SF3's lore. With her fellow demons, Widow shares a common origin, all were hosts for Titan's shadow entities, and a common enemy in Shadow. However, there's no evidence of deep camaraderie. Demons are notoriously self-centered. They did cooperate fleetingly when facing Shadow at the Gates of Shadows, but that was likely out of necessity. In SF3, Lynx and Butcher have their own separate events, suggesting they are each doing their own schemes. One interesting tidbit: in Shadow Fight Arena, the three, Lynx, Butcher, Widow, were the first SF2 villains to be reintroduced, implying they are a kind of trio representing the old guard. Still, any alliance between them is tenuous. Widow would work with other demons only if their goals align, for example, all wanting to keep Titan out or to cause general chaos. Otherwise, she's perfectly content to operate solo. Titan. Although Widow never meets Titan face-to-face in the story, Titan's impact on her life is substantial. He turned her into a demon host against her will, and she clearly loathes and fears him. Titan is an enemy by circumstance. Widow doesn't have loyalty to him, and in fact she actively works to prevent his entry into their world, since it would spell doom for demons and humans alike. She warns Shadow about Titan's manipulation, calling Titan a puppet master and expressing that she does not want him to arrive in the human realm. In that sense, Widow's interests align with the heroes when it comes to Titan. One could argue that Titan is the one being in the universe Widow might bow to, not out of respect, but out of raw terror, yet she does everything in her power to avoid that subjugation. Titan remains a looming adversary in Widow's story, the one male figure whose domination she dreads more than she hates. This drives her to indirectly assist in his downfall, showcasing that even a villain like Widow will side with the lesser evil. The heroes, to escape the greater evil. Titan. Bodyguards and thralls. Lastly, it's worth mentioning those individuals under Widow's spell. The 5 bodyguards, Urbis, Wolf, Capra, Bear, Puma, and numerous unnamed lovers or slaves all form a part of Widow's sphere of influence. These relationships are entirely one-sided. Widow does not truly care for any of them. They are tools, shield-bearers, and playthings. She often speaks fondly to them in a fake loving tone, only to discard or sacrifice them as needed. For instance, her bodyguards fought to the death against Shadow believing it would earn her favor, a favor that was never coming. Widow's alliances are typically just extensions of her will through mind control or deceit. Dynasty faction. In SF3, Widow's involvement with the dynasty is significant. She befriends the dynasty emperor under false pretenses, and interacts with his court, including Master Galen, an armor expert, and guests like Prince Tarlon. To them, Widow initially appears as a helpful, cultured artisan. Galen compliments her professional eye for armor, and the emperor is eager to hear her opinions. Of course, this relationship is built on lies. Widow's true aim is likely to undermine the dynasty leadership or gain access to resources for her cult. By the event's end, it's implied the dynasty officials discover her treachery, or at least that she's up to no good, putting her at odds with them. If so, Widow would count the emperor and his loyalists as new enemies, yet another powerful man for her to spite. Sanguine cult. Perhaps Widow's most loyal allies, if they can be called that, are the followers of the Sanguine cult. As their nameless one, Widow is the object of their worship. These cultists are likely comprised of despairing dynasty and legion citizens who turn to dark rites. They believe Widow, whom they know by a title rather than name, can grant them relief from pain or fulfill their desires, and so they perform bloody rituals in her honor. In truth, Widow simply exploits them, feeding on their devotion and perhaps their life force. The cult's existence gives Widow a steady supply of enforcers who will do her bidding without needing to be individually seduced. They're already fanatically loyal. It's an alliance of leader and zealots. The cult might aid in resurrecting her, as indicated by her arena abilities, or other nefarious deeds. Importantly, through the cult Widow extends her influence covertly, establishing a kind of shadow network in dynasty and legion territory that is far more insidious than overt conquest. In summary, Widow's relationships highlight her as a character isolated by her own bitterness and power lust. She forms no genuine partnerships in the traditional sense, instead, she weaves webs of influence. The only collaborations she partakes in are those that either further her vendetta, like with Shogun, or stave off a worse fate, like indirectly aiding Shadow against Titan. Everyone else, from cultists to princes, is either prey or a pawn in the grand game Widow plays. Confrontation with Sensei in SF2 Special Edition. This battle occurs when Sensei tracks Widow to her lair in order to stop the rampaging prince. Widow, refusing to trust any man, attacks Sensei with her cohort of followers, Aster and Ermin. The fight is intense, showcasing Widow's combat prowess enhanced by magic. Outcome: Sensei defeats Widow. After her defeat, rather than killing her, he shows empathy for her situation. Moved or at least convinced of his sincerity, Widow relents and divulges critical information: the prince stole the sphere and plans an execution, and that he's become dangerously unstable. This duel thus ends in a reluctant alliance, a rare event where Widow's opponent wins not just her respect but a measure of her cooperation. Shadow vs. Widow in Act 5 of SF2. The climactic boss fight of Act 5 pits the protagonist Shadow against Widow after he defeats her 5 bodyguards. Leading up to this, Widow tries to seduce or intimidate Shadow, but he remains immune to her charm. The duel itself is challenging. Widow teleports around the arena and uses her fans and magic. She can also regain health via lifesteal, prolonging the fight. Outcome: Shadow overcomes these advantages and defeats Widow in combat, earning the orange seal from her custody. A defining moment in this battle is Widow's reaction. Instead of a typical demon's rage, she expresses a kind of impressed acknowledgement when Shadow resists her powers. She is forced to yield, marking the first major defeat for Widow in the series. The player is rewarded with Widow's own fans as a weapon after beating her a second time in Eclipse mode. Battle at the Gates of Shadows in SF2. When Shadow attempts to seal the gates and prevent Titan's entry, Widow returns alongside the other demons to stop him. In this gauntlet, Shadow must fight all 6 demons back to back. Widow confronts him as the 5th opponent in the sequence. By this time, Shadow has already faced tougher foes, but fighting all demons in a row is grueling. Outcome: even teamed up with her fellow demons, Widow cannot defeat Shadow. She is beaten once more. This time, there is no conversation, it's a last stand. However, it delays Shadow enough that Titan's trap is sprung. Widow's effort here is essentially villainous solidarity, but it ends the same way for her, in defeat, fleeing the scene as Titan emerges. Interlude in Shadow Fight 2. When Shadow closes the gates, Mei gets pulled into the other side by Titan. In order to rescue Mei, Shadow must open the gates again by breaking the seals. This requires Shadow to defeat all bosses once again. This is effectively Widow's 3rd duel with Shadow. However, unlike previous fights, Widow's goal is to stop Shadow from playing into Titan's hands. She engages him in battle while simultaneously warning him that proceeding is exactly what Titan wants. It's a mix of combat and cautionary tale. Outcome: Shadow wins the fight, proving once again that he cannot be deterred. Upon losing, Widow delivers her ominous warning about Titan being the puppet master and how Shadow has been doing Titan's bidding unknowingly. This encounter ends with Widow's final words in SF2's storyline, a mix of bitterness: "You fool, you're helping Titan," and genuine concern, a demon afraid of a greater demon. The fight itself cements Shadow's supremacy over all 6 demons once and for all.
I will grace this world with unparalleled beauty. I am yet to find someone able to resist me. Agony is such a small price to pay for a gift of eternity. Who cares about righteousness if you have to betray your nature? Demons? Don't be silly. They only exist in fairy tales. Be careful of what you wish for. Let's spin together in a decadent dance.
Widow's story arc spans ages and games, and intriguingly, she is never definitively vanquished. Unlike some villains who meet a clear end, Widow persists like a lingering shadow. In Shadow Fight 2, after her defeats, her status remains alive and she seemingly fades into obscurity once Titan is defeated. This implies that Widow survived the closing of the Gates of Shadows, perhaps stripped of some power but free from Titan's influence and still very much in the world. Her continued existence is confirmed by her return in Shadow Fight 3. By then, she has adapted and thrived, embedding herself within society, the dynasty, and cultivating a cult following. This evolution speaks to her resilience. Even when the era of demons had ended, Widow carved out a new niche, quietly building influence until she could challenge the new status quo. In Shadow Fight 3 events, Widow's plans are foiled, but again she escapes capture or death. The dynasty authorities learn of her true identity, yet there's no indication they managed to hunt her down afterwards. The Sanguine cult's exposure might have been a setback, but as of the latest events, Widow remains at large. She likely went underground after the Sanguine Forest incident, perhaps to regroup or relocate her operations. Given her cunning, she might even have new identities or safe havens beyond dynasty reach. Importantly, she retains the devotion of any cultists who weren't apprehended. Those zealots would help hide her or carry on her work in secret. As for her ultimate fate, the Shadow Fight series has left Widow's ending open-ended. She has not been conclusively destroyed or redeemed. Instead, she remains an ever-present danger lurking in the shadows of the world. One could speculate that if a future installment or story DLC were to continue, Widow might resurface with a grander scheme, perhaps trying to harness the now-free shadow energy for herself, or attempting revenge on the dynasty for spoiling her last plans, or even targeting the descendants/protégés of Shadow and friends. Within the narrative, Widow's survival serves as a reminder that some evils are not easily erased. Her skills in manipulation make her notoriously hard to eliminate. She can always charm some guard or make a last-second escape. It might very well require a very specific circumstance to truly end Widow's threat. From a legacy standpoint, Widow stands out as one of the franchise's most iconic villains. She left a mark on every hero she met. She tested Shadow's resolve like no other, emotionally more than physically. She challenged Sensei's understanding of the prince's downfall, and in SF3 she shook the dynasty's confidence by infiltrating it. Culturally, in the game's world, the term Demon of Temptation or the cautionary tales of the wicked enchantress likely refer to Widow's legend. Ordinary people in Dynasty might tell stories of a beautiful witch who can steal men's minds, essentially Widow's mythos, urging caution to young men who might be too thirsty for power or love. In the real world, outside lore, Widow's legacy is evident by her continued inclusion in games and the fandom's interest. She's a character archetype, the femme fatale demon, executed with enough depth that she remains compelling through multiple iterations. In conclusion, Widow's tale is one of enduring influence. She began as a jilted lover and transformed herself into a near-immortal mistress of shadows, impacting events across different generations. Her ultimate fate has yet to be sealed. As long as there are wounded hearts and desperate souls, Widow is out there, waiting to spin her web once again. Her ability to survive where others fell and to adapt to new worlds, from a medievalesque era in SF2 to a more modern fantasy era in SF3, cements her as a persistent force. Should another Shadow Fight chapter arise, it wouldn't be surprising to find Widow involved, either as a lurking menace or even an unlikely ally if it serves her interest. Until then, she remains an enigmatic figure in the shadows, the lover-turned-demon, the cult queen without a name, the Black Widow spider forever weaving schemes in the dark.